Thank you very much, Claudio. Just real quickly, there's a new Russian AI application called Chat KGB. It's asking all the questions, and you're obligated to answer them. Maybe. Next, we examine trade dynamics and complexity, moderated by Dr. Noel Hasagaba. Please welcome our distinguished panel.
Please.
I'm Carlos. Hi, Carlos.
Nice to meet you.
All right, yes. Please. All right. They put an extra chair just to confuse us a little bit. Hello again. Good afternoon. It's so great to be with all of you here today. My original plan was to start off and break the ice by telling you some AI-related jokes, but Wink took them all. And because we are running a little behind schedule, I thought I would just jump into our panel discussion. I have a question for the audience. Can you think of a topic that is more timely and relevant than this, especially at the Global Supply Chain Summit? This panel is aptly titled, "The New Trade Reality, Rethinking Supply Chains in an Era of Complexity and Tension." Now, I've been coming to this summit, like many of you, for more than 10 years. And every year, it seems, there's a new form of disruption, there's a new source of uncertainty, and a new layer of complexity confronting the global supply chain. And this year, the word tension was added to the conversation. And I don't think that's even a slight exaggeration. Between shifting trade policies, regional military conflicts, and a changing political landscape, the global supply chain is facing what many call an unprecedented moment in history. So when President Trump was reelected, I think most, certainly in the shipping industry, anticipated a new round of tariffs. And some people suggested at the time that we've seen this movie before, so we should be prepared. But as we look back at 2018, 2019, and we compare that with what we've experienced the last 7 or 8 months, I think it's fair to say this is not the same movie. It's not even a sequel. And what we're seeing today is truly unprecedented. And so this is why this panel is so important. We have an all-star panel. This is a distinguished group of people from all over the world who are going to help us unpack and put this moment in history in perspective for all of us. So I'm going to introduce each of them very, very briefly because I want to jump into the conversation right away. With us today, I want to start by introducing each of them. With us today is my good friend, who is the Consul General of Mexico in Los Angeles, and that is Ambassador Carlos Gonzalez Gutierrez, who has served in this post since February of 2024. And as a career diplomat since 1987, he has had 5 assignments abroad, and we're so fortunate to have the ambassador with us today. And I would say also that he is a proud USC alum. So fight on, Ambassador. With us today is also another good friend. He is a professor, he is a doctor, and that is Marcus Mao. And Marcus, who's right next to me, he is the head of the Institute for Innovative Strategies, the German Logistics Association, and he was just reelected as president of the European Logistics Association, which is massive. They have 56,000 members. So try managing an association that size. And so we're fortunate to have Marcus. Let's give him a hand. With us today, we also have Konstantinos Hariotis, who I met just a day ago, and we've become best friends. He is the Vice President of European Logistics Association. He's the President of the Institute of Logistics and Management and the founder and CEO of Telenavis. And he's going to tell us a little bit more about that during our conversation. Let's give Konstantinos a hand. On my far left is Dr. Veit Kohnhauser. And Dr. Kohnhauser is the professor for logistics and supply chain management. He's also the head of studies for Master in Logistics Engineering and Management. He also wears various hats. He's the board member of Supply Chain Intelligence Institute in Austria. He's the CEO of VNL GmbH, and he is with the University of Applied Sciences in Upper Austria School of Management. Let's give Dr. Kohnhauser a warm welcome. And finally, and not least, is M. Jagannath Rai, better known as MJ. And MJ is a founder and director of Titan Sea and Air Services, TSAS, a globally recognized freight forwarding company established in 1994. He's also founder, director, and former chairman of the U.S.-India Importers Council. And we're so excited to have MJ with us today.
Thank you.
All right. All right. So now that we have the introductions and you know who our all-star panel is, we're gonna launch right into the discussion. Here's a question for each of you. And again, because of time, I'm gonna see if each of you can try to limit this opening question to a couple of minutes or so. So when most people talk about the current trade and geopolitical landscape, they describe it using these words: unprecedented, historic. Let me begin by asking each of you to describe this moment in time and put it in perspective for the audience. How is this current environment different from any other point in history? What makes this moment unique? And here's the other question: are we witnessing the beginning of a fundamental shift in global trade, or is this simply a momentary blip? So I'll begin with Marcus.
Thank you. Okay, where to start? It's actually, I was thinking about it, and I would say that what we have seen before is something that had to do with more or less trade disputes in relation to what we have now. Whereas now we have a structural change. Second, with the trade disputes, we think about tariffs. We are all used to what kind of ever tariffs. But now suddenly we see that it's more the rewiring of our supply chains, which as an effect is questioning, at least, and Nick described it very good already in the morning, what we are used to for now, or optimized over 30 up to 40 years. So, and last not least, the effect comes now from geopolitical considerations, which is relatively new because we were also, let's say, confident with the setting that we had, which has, where trade was more or less giving the politicians an idea what they should go for to optimize free trade. And now we think of national security, super important industries, and with that, it's a big change.
Very well summed. Konstantinos?
Okay, let me describe. Back in 18, does that work? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Back in 18, we didn't have the AI story, the geopolitical tension, the different spheres that the globe is tend to participate.
Oh, there is a problem? Is it better now?
There we go.
Okay.
Yes.
So we have new ingredients in the soup of the globe. We have AI, we have geopolitical tensions, the Ukrainian war, Yemen, China. We have different spheres which tend to get bigger and bigger, and maybe the future will be isolated. So we have a new scheme. We have to see how this is going to develop. I'm not quite sure that it will develop one way or the other, but for sure we are in a turning point that will lead us to a new era for humanity.
So more ingredients in the soup, more than just a trade dispute. MJ, what do you think?
First of all, good evening and namaste from India. And first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Nick and Stephanie and Marvi for participating in this wonderful panel discussion. And by looking at the audience, we can definitely make out how this supply chain has become so serious. Because I've been seeing everybody seriously sitting since morning here, and they're very carefully watching and listening. So that itself shows now the supply chain management has completely changed. Now you mentioned about this 2018, and I can definitely, since I am now spent almost 4 decades in the supply chain management and logistics industry. Now I still remember that in 1990, when the Gulf War took place, and I was working for an American company in India. And we had a lot of difficulties in air freighting the goods from India to US. And that was the time, we just hired a special charter flights, and we brought all the big brands from India to US. And very soon the war got over and we became normal, and all the Gulf airlines, they resumed and things became normal. But again, like 1991, that USSR split. And then again, 2008, depression, this recession started. Even in the recession, it has always, when the US recession starts, it directly or indirectly it affects to the Middle East and Asia also. So after that, now 2018, you just mentioned about this China-US trade war. So by all this, it automatically later, it automatically resumes the normal thing. But now what I can see is that it is completely getting changed, because this change is going to be a major change, especially because of whether it is a geopolitical or whether it is environmental or either a technology based, or it is going to be a major change, which is directly or indirectly, both the way it is impacting to the supply chain management subject, but it is all happening for the positive. So I think we should welcome this, and we should go with the stream.
Thank you, MJ. I like how you ended on a positive note. Mr. Ambassador, what is your perspective? How is this moment in time different?
Well, first, thank you very much for inviting us. Nick, thanks. I'd like to tell you that to us, Mexicans, this is a very significant shift of paradigm, and we better understand it as such in order to face reality as it is in a better way. 30 plus years ago, when Mexico negotiated NAFTA, now called the USMCA, the government back then, the Mexican government back then, wanted to lock in a series of economic reforms and economic policies that were based on market-oriented reforms and an export-oriented economy. And we found back then, 30 plus years ago, that decision makers in this country were perfect partners, because back then they believed that in the long term, free trade and immigration were good for the United States. Unfortunately, the current administration doesn't seem to be convinced that neither free trade nor immigration is going to be good for the long term. And we need to find a new space with them, simply because 80% of our products that we export and 80% of what we import is to this country. So that's the first huge change. The second very important change is that throughout all these years we have been trained, we diplomats, internationalists, that in the US-Mexico relationship is so important and so fully integrated our economies are, that we better compartmentalize, that we should negotiate one issue separated from the others. So if we have troubles on immigration, we deal with immigration, but we kept trade issues completely separated, or drug trafficking, or whatever issue you want to talk about our bilateral relations. Now we have an administration that wants to negotiate everything in a comprehensive way, in which everything is on the table, and in which leverage comes from access to the US market. That is a significant shift that has changed the way we perceive our role in global trade.
Very good. Thank you very much. And later in the conversation, Mr. Ambassador, I'm going to go back to Mexico in a moment, but that's a great introduction. So, Dr. Kornhauser,
Yeah.
what are your views?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having the opportunity to share some European perspective with you on this topic. From a European perspective, contrary to some people's opinion in Europe, global trade of industrial goods is still growing. In fact, it was growing since 2018 by around about 12%. But what we have also seen in this time is that there is increasing protectionism. Since 2008, we have seen round about 1,700 new trade policy measures that clearly have a protectionism characterism. In the same period of time, there were only about 200 agreements for free trade. I think supply chains are also much more resilient than people think, or most people think. COVID was a good example. It only took a couple of months to reach a pre-pandemic level in the supply chains again. So some of you may be surprised, but good old Europe is still number one in export region worldwide, closely followed by Asia. Each account approximately for 8.5 trillion US dollars in export. And I'm sorry to say, US is far behind with 3.2 trillion US dollars in export. So this in combination with the high public debts, I think most of the experts in Europe understand why the current administration has to take some action. How these measurements are implemented has left many of us confused, and I think it has also damaged the relationship and the mutual trust seriously. But what I think makes this point of time really unique is the geopolitical dimension of the supply chains. So the focus in supply chain management is shifting from global integration, free trade, risk avoidance, towards regionalization and strategic decoupling. Like Markus said before, I think there is a structural transformation of global supply chains, one that prioritizes autonomy and political power over efficiency, cooperation, and also shared prosperity.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Kornhauser. And I think you've heard different perspectives, but they're all saying the same thing. They've established that this point in history is unique. It's unprecedented. So when you hear that in the news, it's not an exaggeration, right? So I want to shift now to US-China, and really China and the rest of the world. In recent years, we have noticed a shift in manufacturing from China to Southeast Asia. For example, in 2018, at the port of Long Beach, China accounted for about 70% of our business. Today, that's down to 60%. And at the same time, we have seen Vietnam climb the ranks very sharply. So many shippers have adopted what they call a China plus one strategy, while others are experimenting with near or friendshoring. So where do these trends, where do you see these trends headed in light of the current trade situation? So I'm going to ask Marcus to weigh in, and then I'm going to go to Fight after that. Marcus?
Of course, we see these changes over time, and it has to do with the ability of other countries to fill the space that China has taken for so long in all these areas. We created the strength of China, and again, Nick, you said it in the morning, it's something that is not coming out of nowhere. It's a development process over a long period of time. So this is how it is as of today. Now, with new geopolitical decisions, we are considering to diversify, at least, And the nearshoring, the reshoring, and the friendshoring also implicate that if you do friendshoring, there may be others that do not qualify for that category anymore, or maybe not in a specific industry or for specific products. And due to that, we will see this change, which of course will affect the volumes that come from one country or the other, or maybe the value of products that come in specific categories. So we will see that, and it's actually what we are discussing or what everyone mentioned. It all needs to come together. And friendshoring also means, and there was a good point from the others to highlight that you need to be good to your friends, yeah, because we have long-term relationships, and it's not that you can decide on a weekly or monthly basis who is good and who is bad. So this can destroy a lot of confidence in the real progress of these working together activities.
Yeah, thanks for that fight.
Yeah, I think what Markus just said also fits to my picture. This shift from China to Southeast Asia reflects, also in my opinion, a broader trend of diversification. I think the China +1 strategy is driven by geopolitical tensions, raising trade barriers, and the need to reduce dependence on single countries. And we have done some research, and it's obvious the most cost-efficient supply chains operate with high volumes because they are leveraging the economies of scales. And in our studies, we did a global supply chain mapping of electric batteries, thousands of companies, 32,000 trade relationships in 190 countries worldwide, and 8 companies account for 95% of the global lithium extraction. And only 10 companies control 93% of the global cell manufacturing. So as long as companies prioritize their sourcing strategy on purchasing costs, highly concentrated supply chains will continue to dominate, and they will further expand. However, our research also demonstrates some alternative approaches. For example, we assessed supply chains based on the democracy index of the countries involved in this supply chain. And we were identifying the highest democratic alignment, so with trade partners sharing same values, same standards, some institutional frameworks. And you could obviously choose some other supply chains for your companies. Or alternatively, you could optimize the CO2 emission. That would mean the supply chain needs to be shorter to minimize the transport distances. That often comes with higher costs. So the approach supports nearshoring, as Markus mentioned, and also allows some flexibility and better responsiveness. But I'm sorry to say this diversification does not occur automatically. I think the decision makers in the companies and the policy makers must clearly define their priorities. Do they want to be cost efficient? Do they want to have trading partners with a democratic index? Or do they want to be environmental sustainable? And sometimes you are lucky, but most of the time I think there is no one-size-fits-all solution. So strategic trade-offs are inevitable to find some alternative supply chain routes.
Yeah, thanks for those perspectives. You know, as we navigate the changes in trade policy and the new tariff landscape, the adoption of technology to make the workforce more efficient continues to evolve. So this question is for Konstantinos. You've run a technology company in Europe for the past 25 years. Describe the role of technology and innovation in the global supply chain and how the rate of adoption is cascading around the globe.
I like to have the microphone. It is, I'm feeling like a singer. So yeah, the last 25 years, I am promising to my clients that we are going to give them the tools for optimizing their daily routes with algorithms, with AIs, with delivery orchestration. which means that we promise that they will do it with the minimum cost, which means minimum kilometers, minimum use of vehicles, and at the same time have the best possible customer experience, which nowadays means deliveries on time, within time windows, means making sure that any transportation and any condition for pharmaceuticals or food will be met. There will be a notification platform telling what exactly is happening out there. And there will be also the flexibility and agility part, which means that if something goes wrong, we have an alternative solution. Or at least we notify that we'll be late. And then we have technologies. What is the problem for the last 25 years? I have seen repeatedly. One problem is, again, technology is data. Data is a very difficult animal. Everybody says, yes, we have perfect data. And when you go to the data, you find out that it's not so good for optimization and for algorithms to do your job. However, this is not the most important problem or obstacle. Humans and adoption is the most important part, in my opinion, because you have procedures, because you have history, because everyone wants to do exactly what did yesterday. And when you put technology and you want to have benefit out of it, you have to change. If you not change, there's no, on the first place, you don't need technology. You do the same thing with technology, which means more cost without benefit. What is the gap? The gap is how you design and how you train people. Training and certifying them is one of the most important parts to have humans, and I hope we are, for the next decades, we still have humans on the management position, at least, and making sure that everybody understands the same thing with the same words. In the European Logistics Association, we have the ELA certification, which exactly is doing that thing. In more than 30 countries, we have established an ELA certification for senior, junior logisticians. And we can have these potential users for whatever technology we're going to use. This is something that we have to incorporate humans and technology together to do the job by the end of the day.
Yeah, we appreciate that perspective. And, you know, for example, when his lapel mic stopped working, you needed a human to bring the handheld mic. So technology in and of itself is a tool. It becomes a solution which is integrated right into the process. Thank you very much for that. You know, I want to shift gears because we want to cover as much ground as possible. One of the stated objectives of the administration's approach to tariffs and trade policy is to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. And you've heard some of that already from our prior speakers. How much manufacturing can be repatriated to the U.S. realistically, and how could this affect the global supply chain I'm going to start with Fight on the end and then have MJ give their perspective. Fight.
Yeah, like in the previous keynote, our analysis shows a very similar picture. We think that the share of manufacturing, which could be brought back to the US, is very limited. We calculated with less than 10% without massive subsidies or significant price increases. High domestic labor costs, regulatory barriers, supply chain complexity, these are usually hindering large-scale reshoring. And frankly speaking, I think the approach is not very new. Some of you may remember the 20th century import substitution strategies. Instead of strengthening domestic value creation, such approaches often have the opposite effect, leading to long-term productivity losses and economic inefficiencies. And for example, Argentina pursued an import substitution strategy in the 1930s to achieve economic independence. And while it initially really boosted the industrial growth, long-term consequences were high inflation, inefficient and uncompetitive industries, and mounting external debts and a deep industrial stagnation from the 1970s onward. And supply chains are globally shifting. And they're not shifting towards the countries with high trading barriers, but towards the stable and open regions, which clearly give some competitive advantages. And the EU faces a very similar problem, because they want to reshore electric batteries. But our research shows that import tariffs would not automatically lead to more battery cell production in Europe. I think rather than trying to catch up with the Asians, we need a long-term industrial strategy. And our recommendation is Europe must manage much more carefully the raw materials embedded in finished products and goods it has already imported into the EU market, ensuring they get recycled and reprocessed. So the circular economy concept, I think, is a business model for the EU to reduce dependencies on critical raw materials. And at the same time, it strengthens competitiveness and sustainability for production made in Europe. So without addressing structural factors such as energy costs, labor costs, infrastructure, innovation capacity, or supply chain integration, reassuring efforts, in my opinion, risk of failing short.
You know, I like how you came armed with data, a lot of data. We appreciate that. MJ, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with my co-panelist. Basically, you know, like every product which is manufactured in different country, they have their own plus and minus. So, you know, if a product is getting manufactured in Asia, so when it comes to US, the totally, you know, like getting expertise on manufacturing that particular product. So it will definitely take time. So definitely, end of the day, the cost of manufacturing is going to be very higher. So in the long term, if you see, of course, definitely it is interesting to bring the production back, because end of the day, after we hear about this tariff and all, like, so when you see the cost, definitely I think it will be lesser than the market price. So we can definitely bring it to US and manufacture. But I am seeing that, you know, like raw material, when you are just bringing it, number one is transportation cost. So if you are sourcing it from nearby, so it will be definitely more economical to manufacture in US.
Yeah, thanks for that, MJ. You know, for those of you who were here this morning and you heard the fireside chat that Nick did with Randy, he talked about advanced manufacturing. I mean, when we talk about manufacturing, we're not talking about manufacturing 50, 60 years ago. This is advanced manufacturing. It's like a paradigm shift. So I think it's important to make note of that, right? So the next couple questions are for the ambassador. And I promised earlier we'd get back to Mexico. The USMCA, ambassador, as you mentioned a moment ago, was signed on November 30th, 2018. In 2023, Mexico emerged as America's largest trade partner, surpassing China. What role do you see for Mexico? And what is Mexico's strategic role in transformation of regional supply chains and the country's commitment to building stronger, more resilient cross-border trade networks?
Well, first, let me say, I don't think there is a country in the world that is more convinced and more committed to free trade than Mexico. Free trade for us has been very generous. We became #1 trading partner of the United States, something that 30 plus years ago, when NAFTA was signed, in our wildest dreams, we could imagine that. And our trade was multiplied by 10. So the most important thing for us is to protect that, what we call patrimonio, those assets that we already have. Those assets come in part because of our geography, the fact that we share this 3,000 kilometers border with the US, the fact that we have access to both oceans, but also based on a strategy that we cannot change from one day to the other. And that strategy, among many other things, means to sign trade agreements with as many countries as we can. We are one of the countries with more free trade agreements with the rest of the world. So we are hoping to preserve our strong relationship with the US. We are convinced that we can become the country with the greatest access to the US, no matter where these tariffs land after all dust settles. We are convinced that together with Canada, we will be the country in the world with the best access to the US. But at the same time, we need to make sure that the productivity price that we are going to pay, or that the US is going to pay, and to some extent us as partners of the US, the productivity price that we're going to pay because of this import substitution model does not affect us in our trade with the rest of the world. So we need to diversify. We need to keep our tariffs as low as possible with the rest of the world. We need to be as open as we have been for the last 30 years, as much as we can, to mitigate the effects in terms of productivity.
Well said, Ambassador. Here's a follow-up question for you. Approximately 90% of trade between the US and Mexico is via land border. Do you see opportunities for short sea shipping, or what some call marine highway, in the future?
Well, yes, you are right. There is a huge opportunity for us there, for us meaning the US and Mexico. Today, only 11% of our trade with the United States is transported by sea, and most seaway transport operations have been merely oil between the US and Mexico, compared to 70% by road and 12% by rail. So it is only natural that we shall explore how to export more goods through the sea, through the ocean. We have the obligation of promoting the development of the southern part of the country, Oaxaca, Chiapas, Guerrero, and the development of those regions depend on how well we can better connect them through sea and rail into the US market. So that is one of our priorities. That's why the previous administration and this administration has established as one of its top infrastructure priorities the development of the Trans-Seismic Corridor, the Tehuantepec Corridor, the narrowest part of Mexico, to become a multi-transit operation between both oceans that could replicate what right now the world has at the Panama Canal.
Yeah. And I've had conversations with the ambassador at the port of Long Beach. We were very motivated and we'd love to see more trade with Mexico via sea. Whatever mode of transportation brings those Mexican avocados faster to the US, right? Right. But no, I appreciate your perspective on that, Ambassador. And Marcus, in Europe, you have short sea shipping. Why don't you chime in on how that works for the European continent?
We do have that very traditional, and it's out of the geographics of our continent. Yeah, we have actually 5 zones if you go around. So Black Sea, Mediterranean, Atlantic, North Sea, Baltics. So these are regions that by definition have short sea transportation for decades and centuries, actually, if you go back. But if you see the new solutions, I would like to point out just one for you. Along the Atlantic route, you can go with the same amount of time, have the truck, which was supposed to be a truckload, going from Bilbao towards Rotterdam. But most industry leaders, supply chain experts are not really taking that into account, because also in we are very multimodal by definition. We have a lot of solutions. Many are still struggling by bringing it from the road on the train. And then to go to the ship is still a challenge, but there are a lot of opportunities, and I'm very happy to hear that you're considering it, because you have so much volume that you could shift. You are avoiding all that hassles that you have when it comes to trucking, and the ship will go 24/7. Now the truck drivers need to have a rest, and all the other stuff that we all know about trucking. So that's actually a very good opportunity, and I'm happy to hear that you're working on that.
We're going to make it happen, right, Mr. Ambassador?
Yes, we will.
All right. So I have some bad news for the audience. We're up on our last question. Can you believe that? Fascinating, right? So this is probably the most important question for the audience. Everything that our panelists have shared has been insightful. It's been excellently laid out, and I appreciate you all for doing that. But here's the final question. Where do we go from here? Where do you see the current situation going? How do you think, or how do you hope this ends? If this were a movie, how does a movie end? So I'm going to start with Fight and make our way back this way. Fight.
Okay. So Neil, thank you very much. As you like some numbers, I will give you some more.
The more you got, the better. I love numbers.
I think, first of all, it's important to distinguish between short-term effects and long-term structural consequences. And I give you an example. The US tariffs generated 87 billion in revenue within just 5 months. That's 2.4 times as much as in the same period last year. So that's visible and that's easy to communicate. And this may also appear for some people as a success. However, the risk is these costs are at least partly passed on to American consumers, and they are effectively acting or functioning like a hidden tax. And at the same time, the US companies or the US-based companies burden the higher input costs for their business. The second thing, we already observe what has been mentioned before, trade diversion. I give you again an example. In the initial tariff shock phase, when the US and between US and China, the maritime capacity shifted away from the Trans-Pacific route. Europe, Japan, and Korea temporarily absorbed these volumes, each increasing their trade flows by around 1.5%. Nevertheless, in my opinion, I'm convinced the transatlantic trade relations will remain strong and vital long term. And I'm therefore very pleased also that we will welcome Professor Nick Wyers in Vienna in February to further discuss bridging EU and US supply chains. And I believe that we still have a very promising future ahead of us. Thank you very much.
That's what the audience wanted to hear. Mr. Ambassador, how do you think this movie ends?
Well, as you know, we are in the midst of negotiations with the United States, and sometimes it seems that those negotiations will never end, because after 90 days, after a few months from now, we will be negotiating again for the review of the USMCA. So we are in constant talks with the US government. We want for the US to be successful because that's the best way we can also be successful. We are fully integrated, and I agree in terms of the resilience of the supply chains that we have built over the last 3, almost 4 decades. I think that it's pretty clear that no country in the world can make an iPhone by itself. Behind every sophisticated product that enriches our lives, there is a very complex manufacturing and trading networks in which not only people, but also parts and knowledge all move back and forth across borders. And because of our proximity to the US, because of our propensity and belief in free trade, we think, again, that Mexico should be the country with the greatest access to this market, and that will eventually help Mexico's growth.
That sounds like a happy ending, Ambassador. Like that. MJ, what do you think?
Yeah, now, when we are talking about this complexity and tension in this logistics and supply chain management, I just would like to share the, message always our Prime Minister share with the world, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means it is one earth, one family, and one future. So keeping this in mind, if you just, do business, I'm sure that there won't be complexity and tension in supply chain management. And secondly, now most of the complication, even if in one country you just develop the best technology system, everything, but on the other side, whether it is a origin or maybe destination, if that side is not compatible with the technology what you adopt, so definitely, in one places you are going to get stuck. Because I have seen many times, the shipments comes from US to India, and it is very easy to ship the cargo from the origin. But when it comes to India, so if the documents are not compatible as per India's regulation, so it can similar way, it is originating from one country and the destination, it doesn't get compatible. As basically, I'm talking about uniformity. So there are many cases where, we discuss in our public forum, in freight forwarding public forum, we discuss about this, how to make the compatibility, like one country's shipping bill should become the another country's bill of entry. So if, as long as that is not happening, this difficulty will continue. And I am sure with the latest technology getting into very aggressive mode, I'm sure this uniformity will come in the logistics system and things will become very comfortable to deal with.
Very good. Thank you for that, MJ. Konstantinos, what do you think?
Back in 80s, Thatcher and Reagan began the story of the open trade. Since then, we have seen this developing with the technology and logistics, because the logistics and technology are very, very combined. Integration between logistics chains, nations, will be there. I mean, it's impossible to take steps behind. It's impossible. Maybe we will see some kinds of walls, but it will not be break. It will be silicon walls between specific regions with different technologies. But I think that all this story with Trump and taxes and whatever, it is something that 5 years or maybe less from now, we do not remember it. We will be more integrated because what you said before, in order to make an iPhone, you need bits and parts all over the world. It's not just in the Silicon Valley. You could use a Tesla or an iPhone or whatever with today's technology. So that will continue in an exponential trend.
We need each other. It's inevitable. All right, Marcus, how did this movie end?
Positive, definitely positive. We will have a lot of, let's say, the very good point is for all of us, we will have so much positive work to do in order to make all these adjustments. So we will have structural changes, of course. We see that. We had that in the presentations on stage. This is obvious. When automated manufacturing is coming back to the States with all of that, we have a change of supply chain flows. We also learned that the global trade will not really change. What we are going to ship from where to where will change. But so all of that will be adjusted with the right technology coming with the logistics processes. So we have so much to do. So with that, it will be optimistic.
All right, I like that, right? So I am an eternal optimist, so I like the answers from my panelists, and I hope that our optimism translates to you. As a friend of mine recently said, take the chill pill, don't overreact, and in the end, the dust will settle, right?
Correct.
And we just got to roll up our sleeves and go. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a hand to our distinguished panel. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Noel and crew. Another round of applause for them. I mean, very distinguished group of panelists for sure. I do need you guys to go to the back of the room because we're going to go right to our next panelists. So we need to switch out your lapels. Because we're running behind, we're going to skip